Despite Metallica's humble beginnings, entering the scene as a relatively unknown, unwashed, greasy-haired thrash metal band, they have managed to reach the upper echelon of the music business, so much so that their logo is slapped on literally any piece of fabric a Chinese factory can get their hands on. They have managed to cement themselves as the biggest financial force in metal music throughout their tenure, which has mainly been achieved through the creation of both groundbreaking and extremely questionable music projects. This suggests that their success is entirely based on their production of music, which isn't entirely true in my opinion. Considering their success, you'd think the band would be financially comfortable enough to avoid taking the legal route upon hearing that a teenager has been able to listen to their music for free, or a company has used a similar font for them for their logo. Yeah, no, that's not really the case. The band has a consistent history of allegedly utilizing lawsuits to silence or eradicate anything that might be making money off of their product. This ranges from powerhouse peer-to-peer file sharing websites like Napster to even cover bands and just the concept of a global disease itself. Whether it's the band itself or the legal team behind it, Metallica have shown little to no remorse when they feel their product or brand has been taken advantage of. Despite Metallica's lawsuit with peer-to-peer file sharing application Napster being their most iconic, it wasn't actually the first time Metallica had decided to get in a legal battle, with money being the primary driving force behind the lawsuit. After signing with Elektra Records in 1984, the band would go way above and beyond what the label had ever expected, becoming one of the biggest bands on the planet and a cash cow for the company, achieved through overpriced box sets and countless tours. Despite this, Metallica would become frustrated when Elektra cancelled their renegotiated deal in 1994. The band would legally demand their release from the label, citing that they were young, naive and preyed upon by the larger label when they originally signed back in 1984. The label and the band would go back and forth for about a year, eventually settling outside of court after Elektra would increase royalty payments and give Metallica rights to their masters. Despite this lawsuit seeming entirely understandable from the viewpoint of Metallica, it marked a change for the band. They realised they had the ability, financial power and reputation within the industry to promote real change through legal means, which would inform one of the most important legal battles in music history that would mark a new era for the listening habits of millions: Metallica versus Napster. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the Napster lawsuit, we first need to briefly explore what Napster actually is and how it became such a thorn in the side of Metallica. Launched in 1999, Napster was a peer-to-peer file sharing application that specifically focused on the sharing of digital audio. Essentially, each individual using the application could easily share music with one another. Despite services like this already existing, Napster quickly became popular due to its user-friendly interface and focus on music, making it extremely easy for music fans to download copies of songs that they otherwise wouldn't be able to listen to due to its rarity or just the fact that they couldn't afford to actually buy a physical copy. At its peak, Napster had reached 80 million users and had essentially transformed music into a public good that could be downloaded and listened to by fans for free. Despite the fact that many artists came out with their support for Napster and its ability to easily market music towards the masses, many argue that the promotion and consumption of entirely free illegal music was damaging the sales of records. It would be this fact that specifically enraged Metallica. Napster would originally come to the attention of Metallica after the band heard a demo of the unreleased song I Disappear being played on the radio. They were able to trace the song's leak back to Napster, where they were shocked to find that their entire discography was available to download for free on the application. Lars Ulrich would immediately storm to Napster headquarters with a list of 300,000 names and slam it on Justin Timberlake's desk. So what were these names, you might ask? Well, Lars had decided to compile over 300,000 Napster users that had illegally downloaded Metallica music and send the list directly to the company. These users were promptly banned, which worsened the already lessened public opinion of the band. Much of the public saw this as Metallica essentially attacking their own fans, with most of the names belonging to teenagers and university students who likely couldn't even afford physical records and probably shouldn't be seeing this kind of scrutiny. This was followed by a huge lawsuit from the band towards Napster, which was also heavily criticised by fans. You see, much of Metallica's early success was off the back of tape trading culture, which was essentially just the physical, scuddy hipster version of peer-to-peer file sharing websites like Napster. Critics saw this as Metallica seeking to destroy a slightly different, more modern version of what contributed to their early success, harming the potential success of many smaller artists. This was backed up by studies that found Napster users were more likely to to spend money on physical copies and merch than the average music listener. This, combined with the unexpectedly good chart performance of Radiohead's Kid A, which had seen a lot of its hype from a leak on Napster a few months before its release, painted a good picture for the reputation of Napster and further dampened the argument of Metallica. Despite being seen by the majority of their fanbase as corporate money-hungry slugs, Lars would continue to belittle Napster in increasingly comedic ways that I would say have aged poorly but were pretty bad to begin with. An example of this is a video aired during the 2000 MTV VMAs, taking the form of a fake advert. The video saw the VMA host listening to Metallica music through Napster. Lars would then appear on screen, looking about as goofy as he usually does, before exclaiming that if a fan can steal Metallica music, Lars should be able to steal whatever he wants in return. This ranged from the fan's bottle of Pepsi, his computer, and even his literal girlfriend that Lars proceeded to smack the ass of. This video has aged horrendously bad and was pretty down bad to begin with, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know whose idea it was to have Lars Ulrich as the main actor in what is essentially Metallica propaganda. This motherfucker can barely even string a sentence together. The video also paints every Metallica fan as a disgusting nerd, which really shows how Lars and the band saw their fanbase at the time. Despite much of the public being against the lawsuit and the message behind it, the vast majority of the music industry fully backed Metallica and their decision to sue Napster, with Dr. Dre alongside various major labels choosing to sue the file sharing service. Napster would eventually reach a settlement with Metallica and Dr. Dre, requiring Napster to place a block on any files on the platform from artists who didn't want their music to be shared. This is obviously easier said than done, and over the following months, Napster would attempt to introduce methods to remove and block all copyrighted content. Of course, none of these worked, resulting in the judge forcing the company to shut down until they were able to remove 100% of the copyrighted content. This promise would never be fulfilled, resulting in the closure of Napster. You may be thinking this must have been a huge win for Metallica and others involved. Well, not really. The vast majority of Napster users had already moved on to identical services. It honestly didn't reduce the prevalence of music piracy at all. If anything, it made the public more aware of its possibilities. Napster would eventually pay out $26 million to the music industry before filing for bankruptcy and being continuously bought by the businesses, none of which being able to revive its popularity. Metallica weren't really affected. Of course, they had lessened their reputation and were subject to scrutiny from the internet and based cartoon writers, but they were still making a metric ton of money off their music and brand. They were, however, no longer the counter-cultural icons they had previously been seen as. They had become the fat cats they originally went to war against in their Elektra lawsuit. Despite the death of Napster, music still marched in the direction of online services, with streaming services like Spotify being the preferred method for the vast majority of music fans. Surprisingly enough, Napster is still actually alive and pays more royalties to musicians than services like Spotify. Metallica had built a reputation of ignoring any negative attention that they may get from their various business moves, and despite the fact they still had individuals defending them during the Napster lawsuit, this next one was inexcusable for most fans, although it's very unlikely it was the fault of the band themselves. Metallica would decide to send a cease and desist to Canadian tribute band Sandman for using a logo similar to the Metallica logo. Despite the fact Metallica had been in plenty copyright lawsuits, this saw the band receive much heavier backlash due to what was seen again as the band punching down towards individuals who are ultimately fans of their work who simply used a similar font for promotion. After receiving extreme backlash, the band would blame the situation on an overzealous attorney before eventually meeting up with the cover band. Metallica have continued to use the law in order to protect their earnings, with a lawsuit popping up in 2023 from the company responsible for the band's tour merchandise. Although the lawsuit doesn't name anyone in particular, its goal is to essentially eradicate any individual who decides to sell bootleg band merchandise outside of a venue. The company essentially wants to allow police officers to turn up to these events and immediately seize and destroy all bootleg merchandise being sold. Once again, the lawsuit appears to be a losing battle. Much like individuals who pirate songs, merch bootleggers are always going to find a way to sell their stock, regardless of what extra barriers are put into place. Although this literally happened late last year, it isn't actually the most recent piece of lawsuit news that has come out regarding Metallica, with the most recent piece of news being their attempt to essentially sue. Well, not really, but kind of, but also not really. California courts have recently dismissed Metallica's lawsuit seeking $3 million compensation from its insurance company due to the band losing money after being forced to cancel shows due to COVID. Many insurance clauses exclude losses related to communicable diseases, which essentially destroys Metallica's entire argument. They attempted to argue that factors other than COVID could have led to the cancellations, which kind of makes zero sense. They were cancelled due to the lockdown. Although it's unlikely it'll be their last, that seems to be the latest finalization of a high-profile lawsuit in the Metallica saga. Despite the fact many of these lawsuits seem reasonable from the side of Metallica as a business, it's always left a bad taste in my mouth. The band seem to consistently go after people that may be lessening their income even slightly, despite the fact they are one of the most wealthy and successful bands of all time. Many of these lawsuits have come at the expense of smaller artists and are only really available to bands like Metallica due to their sheer size and financial power. I do, however, deny the fact that the band is entirely bad and money hungry in a similar way to, for example, Slipknot, that have just entirely become a business with no real personality. They have been instrumental to the rise of once small bands like Ghost and have continuously made an effort to fundraise for countless charities and global events. I just kind of wanted another reason to dog on this motherfucker for as long as I physically could in another video.